You're listening to the Intentional Parents Podcast, brought to you by Intentional. Intentional is all about spiritual formation in the family. We desire to bring biblical hope and practical help. Enjoy this week's conversation. Welcome back to the Intentional Parents Podcast. We are here today, all four of us. Summertime. Elizabeth doesn't even have sleeves. You wouldn't even know that unless you're over on YouTube. Go check out YouTube if you want. No sleeves.
I'm cold. I've been wearing a sweater all morning.
Do you want me to get your sweater?
Okay.
I can get it. We're going to be talking about a lot of things today. Before we do, how's everyone coming into today? All four of us are here. Phil and Diane. Hi.
Hi.
Good.
Glad to be alive.
We were just talking about, before we hit record, or before, I think we were already recording, but we were talking about how there's certain folks that, we talked about this a couple episodes ago, but how there's certain folks that look their age and act their age, and you guys just don't. You don't act your age or look your age. So good job. So I'm glad you're alive too.
It's good or not that we don't act our age.
No, it's
you're less mature than you ought to be.
When you're young, it's bad. When you're old, it's good. I think when you're young and you don't act your age, it's like grow up. And when you're older,
I think we feel our age.
Today we
This
do.
morning we feel our age.
We still haven't recovered from watching your kids for 8 days.
Oh gosh.
To be honest,
that's true.
and they're wonderful, and we love them.
That's right.
Our son's off camera and he can hear Duke. I hope you heard that. All in pause.
They were wonderful. And
He's
then
like,
we went
I don't know.
and taught a whole weekend at Rise City Church in Gresham, and we're recovering.
You did.
Yeah.
Yes, you did. Well, just real quick before we jump in, thank you to everybody who has rated and subscribed to the podcast. Thank you so much. Thank you for everybody who is subscribed on YouTube. Go ahead and check that out if you want. We have a YouTube channel now, Intentional Parents. You can check that out. But if you haven't had a chance to rate or subscribe, that's just really helpful. You all know the algorithm is out of our control, but that just helps us so much. So thank you for everybody that's done that. If this has blessed you at all, that's just one easy way to say thank you. And also, I think it's important to say thank you to all of our legacy builders, those who are contributing to just help this nonprofit. If you didn't know, Intentional is a nonprofit. We raise funds to help give away content to the world. So if you want to join that, you can actually just click the link in our show notes, and you can become $5, $10 a month goes a long way. So if you decide to help in that way, thank you. And if not, thank you for following along in the journey. But all that's very helpful. Today, we want to talk about this crazy theme that we all know about. And when I say the word, you're going to go, absolutely. And it's that idea of comparison. And it's the air we breathe. It's the culture we live in. It's the stuff that all of us feel. It's become the language really in so much of our time. It's so known and something we deal with so constantly that you don't even really have to talk about it to be doing it. It's something that kind of goes under the radar. It's kind of something that's just become a part of our world, especially as we all know, social media has perpetuated that. We don't need to go in a rant on social media, but obviously we know that that's one of the main contributors. But with the majority of the world, not just America, not just Europe, not just English-speaking countries, the world now being connected through social media, it's created these interesting cultures that we want to talk about. And we just want to talk about what some of those things are. What does Jesus say? How do we combat that as spouses, as parents, as adults living in our time? How do we actually know what is true? How do we not live in a place of comparison and health? And so that's the idea. Opening thoughts before we get into scriptures.
Well, just as you were
not
talking,
everybody at once.
I was just thinking of I feel like there's two levels of comparison. Like there's the maybe surface level that we all can immediately resonate with, that we live in a culture of comparison. Social media doesn't help. It's so hard not to just constantly compare yourself when all you see are people's successes and nobody wants to talk about their failure. There's the comparison we're aware of, but then I think there's a whole other layer underneath the surface that we are constantly comparing ourselves, our lives, our kids. We're going to get into that in a minute, but that we're not conscious to. That because it's so deeply rooted in the combination of what's happening in culture, and I think just our own lives and tendencies, the Bible talks about it a lot, which means it was happening way back thousands of years ago too. So I know we're going to talk about kind of both, the obvious things and the things that are maybe underneath that we're not even always conscious to.
Yeah, I love that. History, Phil and Diane, because you've been around longer than everybody in the room. My curiosity is, did you notice when this came on, or has this always been in some part a part of the world that we inhabit? Or do you remember a time when comparison culture wasn't so much?
I remember a time when comparison was at least not in your face every day.
Okay.
So because before social media, we still compared ourselves.
Okay.
Maybe out of a dissatisfaction of our own selves, of our own lives. That's still going on. But we didn't, unless you bought a magazine, you weren't comparing your body to somebody else's so much.
Okay.
Or you only had your circle of friends really that you were comparing yourself to. Maybe TV might have obviously spoke into that a little bit. But now what you didn't have is ordinary people showing extraordinary, beautiful homes and perfect workout routines and meals and kids who their ponytails stayed in their hair like all day long. And, these perfect looking families that we did not have. There was no visual showing that. So we all knew magazines were fake. We all know Hollywood is, airbrushed and made up. But now you're comparing yourself to ordinary people who look so much better. Their lives look so much better than yours. And that's a lie, but it's in your face every single day.
That's a good distinction. Like it went from celebrities, which you knew like, oh, well, that's, and you're not actually seeing them in real life.
No.
It's easy to say, I'm not going to be that. It was so far that it was like, that's not my life.
No.
Yeah.
But now it's everybody. It's the mom in Montana.
That's right.
Who has the perfect workout routine.
Montana mom.
Homesteading, and she does all this stuff, and the homestead looks perfect.
Yeah.
I mean, the Bible says there's nothing new under the sun, right?
True.
What has been before. I mean, for whatever reason, I just had this random thought way back in Genesis 11, the Tower of Babel, where they go, let's go make a name for ourselves. Yeah. I mean, so this is nothing new. What's new is what Diane is saying, what you guys are saying. It's constant. The news cycle is constant, because
and you guys watch the
news
news
I remember
at night now.
As a non-believer playing in a band, we wanted to be the Beatles, right? There's all you comparing yourself to Paul McCartney, the Beatles,
Yeah.
So that's nothing new.
Sure.
But if you wanted to see what's going on in the world, you had to be at home and turn on your television set for the 6:00 news, right? So now it's just coming at you, and the algorithms are seeking you out, and they figured out how to get you, so that is new. And if you aren't anchored in the right place, you're going to be tossed like the sea or by the winds, weaving through wherever the wind's blowing, So that's
something we've been talking about. I know it's simple, but I know something that we talk about with some of our content around parenting in the digital age is the novel concept of just by watching something together as a family, that actually is not only novel, it's a kind of like, it's very rare now, but even that has like a bonding element. It's just now that everyone has a device that they can go watch their thing on, it takes a bad thing, which is individualism, and just unintentionally hyper does the whole thing. And so if you're wondering like, what's one thing you could do, just start, maybe you can't lessen your media, just start watching stuff together as a family, pick something. And it's going to be hard. We have 15 down to 6. Like Duke is like, I can't watch another princess movie. And the girls are like, oh, it's too scary. Like we're trying to figure out, can the girls watch Planet of the Apes? Probably not. They're probably not at that stage. But Duke's ready. Feels like, no way.
I just saw the preview. I think
that's for the new one.
That would terrify
I'm talking about the older one. I'm talking about some of the ones we've already seen. Anyway, but you're right. That's a good, thank you for that kind of just a little bit of history that it's more, I think that's a good way to say it. It's now just perpetuated. It's in our face. Because, and why we want to talk about this is because I think in a very sub way, many people are living with low line or even deep depression because they are not where they think they should be because of the people that they follow are telling them through their lives that they're not where they're at. And so they live in this kind of deep despair. It's cyclical, like you're saying. And so where do we fix our attention? And so what our hope to do today is we want to just kind of outline maybe some of the 6 major areas in which we see people comparing themselves. And there's going to be, different things that we'll probably mention outside of those 6, but we're the 6. And then really, what does Jesus say? Where do we actually find foundation? Where do we find centering? What does it look like to pause and like be okay with who God's made you, who your family is, your calling, your journey, all that type of stuff. And what's really comforting about all of this is all actually really biblical. So that's a cool moment to highlight. Phil said, in culture, you said that we're exalting all the wrong people.
Yeah.
We're at this stage of life. What was the basketball thing you just shared? You were watching the game last night and they're like exalting some dude.
Yeah. I mean, I was watching, I'm an NBA fan, so I was watching the Mavericks just cream the Minnesota Timberwolves in their home floor. And just watching the macho-ness, Luka Doncic is the star and he's just hitting all these shots, but he's like, looking at the audience, just in their face, like, who's crying now? And you blankety blank, it's like, and he's like, they're talking about the greatest, backcourt shooting ever. So, we're exalting athletes, we're exalting actors. We're in America, it's been going on. I mean, when did American Idol start? 20 years ago? Like, I want this life. I want everybody to notice me. I want, I'm living for the notoriety of others. I want to be somebody. I want people to look up to me, and that's the air we breathe. And I think we're lifting up. I mean, obviously, we're lifting up the wrong people, and so when we follow Jesus, we have a whole different standard that we're living by, and a whole different person that we're wanting to please. So it's what does God think of me? I mean, we're going to get into all this, but I just think of the words of Jesus. He said, my work is to do the will of him who sent me. And I always do, in John chapter 8, I believe, I always do the things that are pleasing to my Father. So he lived to please his Father. He didn't live for the praise of men.
Which
he lived for the praise of God.
Calls, I live for an audience of one.
Audience of one.
Yeah.
You are enjoying content brought to you by Intentional, a crowd-funded non-profit that desires to help families and marriages all around the world in the area of discipleship and spiritual formation. This offering is completely free thanks to the generosity of our growing community of Legacy Builders. Legacy Builders is a group of people from all over the world that gives monthly to fuel this dream that we have in our hearts of seeing discipleship to Jesus in the family become a way of life. A monthly gift of $5, $10, or even $30 can continue to fuel this ministry forward. Our dream is to invite people like you to join and partner with us at a financial level and to see this work integrated into families. So as you listen to this podcast, would you prayerfully consider joining us? Would you allow the Spirit to lead you, even if it's just a few dollars a month? Thank you so much. And may the Spirit of Jesus give you wisdom, clarity, and joy as you pray about joining us. If you want to join today, go to intentionalparents.org and click on Give.
Yeah.
It's a very 1990s phrase. There was many songs written out of that.
Wasn't that an old worship song?
Probably. It was a cheesy word. Probably cheesy, but good heart.
It was actually out of a book that somebody wrote, Karen Burton Maines, who she used kind of an allegory of a kingdom to teach kids.
Oh, interesting.
And so this person was being constantly reminded to live for an audience of one, not for, it was kind of a peer thing, not for the approval of other people. So
what is
that's where it comes from.
That's where it comes from.
It
just
is
reminds
a 90s
me of
thing.
like,
it was probably published in the 90s.
What was that? No, I'm not even going to
It's
sing it.
so good to remind myself though, when I'm thinking, I want to be like somebody else, I want to be better than I am. No. I really do live for an audience.
I just want to be like Elizabeth.
I'm old, as you made sure you pointed out. So it's okay for us to say a few of those cheesy things.
A couple episodes ago,
they're cool when we say them.
It's true.
I literally was sending one of the episodes we talked about. That was we already released it, but the episode that we did about relationships with your adult kids, basically. And jokingly, I sent it to our editing guy as episodes for the elderly.
Oh, yeah. You used the word geriatric in there. So
I think I did, but, at the same time,
Thank you.
My heart is, you obviously know that. But I think a different way to say it we're promoting the wrong people. We promote often people with charisma and not character.
Yeah.
And this is true in the church. I mean, a lot of us are saying,
Yeah.
why are so many people failing? Well, it's because they had a ton of talent. They had a ton of skill. They had a lot of one side of the equation.
Yeah.
And we're drawn to that. We like
Yeah.
that. They're entertaining. There's an entertaining element to that, even in
They're
preaching.
inspiring.
Inspiring, yeah.
Yeah.
But when your life can't back that up, I think it was Tim Keller who had said, this is actually very funny to think about, but the idea is like, you shouldn't write any sort of book until you're 50. You have nothing to say until you're 50. Now, I don't fully believe, I think there's people with stories that have stuff to say.
Right.
That said, the
There's a lot of
concept is
truth.
very true.
Yes,
Like there's
it
so
is.
much of our lives are not ready to be on display or to really help others in an efficient, healthy way. The character, so to speak, isn't usually formed in a deep way until that time. So let's talk about, I want to highlight these 4 things. Phil, we're going to talk about 2 Corinthians 10:12. I want to talk about the other verse you were talking. We're going to talk about some of the talents, some of the 1 talent, 5 talent, 10 talent. We'll talk about that. But let's just highlight really quick the main areas that we see people comparing themselves. So first, ourselves. We compare ourselves with other people. Obviously, that's the overarching theme. Other people's accomplishments, parenting, all that stuff. But the areas are, we often compare our gifting, and this is what we'll go through: our gifting, our calling, our appearance, our lives, and our stage, where we're at. And so I'd love to start with ourselves, with that 2 Corinthians 10 verse. Phil, you want to start us with that? And then we'll kind of maybe just talk about that a little bit. What does that look like when just the idea of comparing ourselves? So Phil.
Yeah. So in 2 Corinthians 10, the Apostle Paul's talking. It's a little different context, but I'll try to apply it to what we're talking about. But there's this line in 2 Corinthians 10, verse 12. He's saying, we're not bold to class or compare ourselves with some of those who commend themselves. And so, I mean, this is, I think of Instagram. Look at me. Look what I'm doing.
Look at my body.
And you immediately think, well, I'm a flake. Like, I don't look, you're doing that, and you have 5 kids. Like, wow, I must be worthless, And so it says, those who commend themselves, but when they measure themselves by themselves and compare themselves with themselves, they're without understanding. But he said, we won't boast beyond our measure, but rather within the measure of the sphere which God apportioned to us. In other words, this is what God's called us to do. We're going to live within these borders. He says, we're not overextending ourselves. And I think the whole concept here is that we're going to get into the different gifts that we have. And it talks about not boasting beyond our measure, but living within the sphere that God has given to us. And so I think sometimes we compare, we look at ourselves and go, wow, look what I just did.
Yes.
And that's very, very dangerous,
There's a verse the part of that verse that I just wrote it down because it was really interesting, that we're not overextending ourselves.
Yeah. Right.
Almost like and I'm translating in real time, so this might not actually be what it means, but what stuck out, at least what I was internalizing in that moment, was when you compare yourself with yourself and get all out of whack, you're actually overextending yourself. And what a biblical truth of a real reality in our life, that we often feel like we end up overextending ourselves to try to live into a life that maybe we weren't designed to live.
This passage is really interesting because the last verse in chapter 10 says, not he who commends himself is approved by God, but whom the Lord commends. And so that's the living. I'm living for Jesus. I always do the things that are pleasing to my Father. That's John 8:29. So it's like, if I'm living for the praise of other people and I'm looking at all my accomplishments, then I begin to, become prideful. Like, look what I did, and think that I did it in my own strength. When in reality, God gave me the body that's working. I have health right now. He gave me the mind that I thought with. It was all gifts from Him.
Well, it's interesting now, our world, if you think about it, and ladies, I really do want to hear from you on this too. But, June is Pride Month. Obviously, they're highlighting the pride of the homosexuality, all that different stuff. But I think it's very interesting that that's the word that was chosen, like pride. But pride's not last time I checked, pride's not a good thing. Doesn't usually help anybody.
No.
And it's just, I think, again, the juxtaposition of our world, like pride is so damaging for us.
Yeah.
And and our world tries to sell it as almost like, it's a good thing. And obviously there's so many different contexts, and being proud of yourself is one thing, but pride is different, being proud. Cause there's a lot in our culture also going around, like, you need to be proud of yourself. I run with the Nike running app sometimes, and oh my gosh, the self-talk that they try to sell you on of just like, you know what you need to do today? Just be thankful for how good you are. You're amazing. Mm-hmm. What are great things that you've done this week? I'm like, I think there is a part of that that's very good. Like, obviously,
celebrate.
Yeah, for sure. Of course, there are good things, and I'm not squandering that. I'm just saying it's interesting. The world that we live in is telling you one thing, and the Bible is just so clear about like true life, true flourishing comes by laying a lot of that down. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So ladies, I know that this is very different. I think it's even maybe worse in some ways for women, especially with social media. We know that now, even from books like The Anxious Generation, that social media, especially in the arena of young girls and all the studies around that, it's so, games, obviously, usually for boys. Our son's playing a game in the background. Love you, son. And then social media for girls is usually the more challenging. But how do you experience some of the comparison stuff? We're going to get into those, few different categories, but I'd love to know initial thoughts on this.
Yeah, I feel like for women, it's never neutral. It feels like it's more often than not, the comparison leads to feeling less than, not inferior is not the right word. What's the opposite of inferior? Superior. It usually is, we see something somebody else is doing, and then we feel like, oh, we're doing a terrible job. They're doing it so much better. I'm failing in this stage of my life. What am I? Often for me, I'll be like, what am I doing wrong? That doesn't look like that for me. It doesn't seem like it's often the other way around of feeling like I'm killing it. Like,
No, I think you're right.
Both I think are the root is the same. And I think the responses come often out of the same place, whether it's a prideful response or a judgmental response of like, I'm doing way better than they are. Usually I feel like where the enemy gets moms and women specifically is, I'm not doing it good enough. Yeah. And what am I, at least for me, and I don't know if you can connect with this, is what am I missing? What am I doing wrong that I can't do all those things? Right. Or
but the truth is, they're not doing it all right either.
Totally.
And that's the lie we have to combat, is that when you get into those people's lives with what we get to do, we end up getting to be behind the scenes of different people's lives that maybe other people know and see. Yeah. And the truth is, they're dealing with all the same stuff that we are. They're dealing with all the same pains. Totally. Their marriages are just as hard. Their kids are just as hard, if not in some cases harder, depending upon your dynamic.
And you have to ask yourself a question: what price are they paying for that success? That we feel like we're working so hard and we can't measure up to it. What price relationally? What price in other areas of their lives in which they're feeling like they're not keeping up because they're doing this one thing well. So this is the most petty thing. But even at my age, we moved into a new neighborhood, and the whole neighborhood is new. So the women on either side of me, about my age, both retired. Whereas
we're going to send them this podcast. So whatever. Watch what you're gonna say.
Yes.
Just kidding.
So no. This is me comparing myself to somebody who's got it together in a way that I don't. So both retired. They both have one grandchild, not 9, both my age. And pretty quickly after they moved in, their garages were just perfectly organized. Everything hung up.
That's a generational sin. I'm telling you.
I know.
It is between you and her like ideal of a clean, like a perfect garage. It's like, it's very outlandish sometimes. I can't figure it out.
How do you measure success?
a clean garage.
She got it from her mom.
Oh, I know. That's why I said it's generational.
I did not pass that on.
I know stuff from you. You and I share a similar bond of like, they're feeling a lot about the garage today. Yeah.
I feel like I've given up the ideals of the garage. I just want to be able to walk in it and find stuff.
I don't just want to walk in. I want their garages.
Oh, I want that too.
I'm myself.
This is confession,
it seems like such a silly thing, but I'm actually ashamed of my garage. When the garage door is open, I'm afraid somebody's
Your
gonna look
garage
at
is
me.
actually
my
very,
gosh.
I mean, I know what level, when you have nothing else going on, the level of like time that you could create a garage like that. But I agree with what the principle you're saying. Like, there are so many things in their life that they don't have to do that are like literally
Right.
within your
Yeah,
responsibility.
so here I'm
to do.
thinking like if I was a real woman and had my act together, my garage would look like my two wonderful neighbors, which is so ridiculous. But it's like this stuff that goes on in your brain, and until you bring it up and talk about it, you don't even realize you're doing it.
Mm-hmm.
You just
You're
feel
so
it
right.
in that pit in your stomach of why can I just not get my act together in this area like my neighbors?
Mm-hmm.
Oh,
I
And
think
it's
that-
so stupid. I know it's stupid, but it's still there.
yes.
I think Elizabeth's right. More often for most people, it's we're feeling inferior, not superior. I mean, there's
Yes.
always people that are braggarts
Yes.
and think I'm amazing
Yes.
and want to let you know about it.
But that's usually to cover up the inside
Yeah.
that feels
Insecurity.
inferior.
And just note,
Yeah.
these are two of the most delightful women you have, most servant-hearted, delightful
They're
women.
great.
Yeah, they just
They're
have
not
something-
that way at all. I'm sure they're not sitting,
Judging your
outside
garage.
with me in between saying, have you seen
But is it
Diane's
them or is it their
garage?"
husbands? You have to ask that question. Is it them or is it their husbands? Because now their husbands have all this time. They might, and you
Yeah.
have a husband that doesn't value that as much as you do.
So maybe it's his fault.
That's what I'm
Yeah.
trying to get
My
at. I'm
fault.
so glad you saw it. Yeah. No, I'm
she
saying,
doesn't compare herself to me.
but you guys also haven't done the traditional thing that so
Yeah.
many folks in your age and stage have, which is
Yeah.
to retire. You guys have said,
Yeah.
no, we're actually
No.
going to continue to,
Exactly.
to do kingdom work. We're going to continue to be very involved with our kids and grandkids' lives. So maybe the cost of that is a garage that is
Sacrifice
not
a
as
garage.
stellar.
There's a word from the Lord for you, babe, right there.
Yeah,
from
it's
your son.
prophetic. I just want to say it. It's prophetic. Well, thank you for kind of going into that. Let's talk about comparing in our gifting, because I think gifting is interesting because you brushed on it with the motherhood part. Gifting as a mom. So let's talk about gifting as maybe men, women, moms, dads, single or not. I think it's interesting because on one side for men, I think you have gifting in the sense of capacity, leadership, success, all that stuff. Then you, as a mom, I think you have that as well. I also think there's what you were saying, gifting of like, well, you can keep your house this way and you can also have a career and your kids can be this way. And then the moms that are particularly good at it, although they may be humble, they really do also love to show it.
Mm-hmm.
It seems to be. And that's just not, I still don't know if that's ever been really helpful. I mean, I think in part it's like, maybe it could be helpful in the sense, I could see it being helpful in the sense that it's a model, or it's maybe like, oh, there's maybe an idea of what I could live into. But so often than not, those people become the authority, even subconsciously. And then we just try to do their life. But we have a whole different set of rules for our life. We have different relationships. We have different. So maybe let's talk about that for a minute. How do we compare in our gifting? And before we do that, there's a really great verse biblically about gifting, about gifts specifically. We were talking about the parable of the talents.
Oh, okay.
I was wondering if you could share that. I mentioned it before, but I really think, Phil, you should maybe just shed light on that really quick because that was really insightful.
We want to invite you to the Intentional Motherhood Retreat 2024. Last year, over 600 mothers gathered together to learn, to worship, both to encourage and to be encouraged. The Father spoke and the Spirit moved and Jesus healed. And it was so incredible that we cannot wait to do it again. We want to invite you October 3rd through 5th here in Bend, Oregon, where we live. We know that the journey of motherhood is both beautiful and it is hard. It is both life-giving and exhausting at times. And we just want to create space for the Spirit to refresh you in your journey. We're going to lean into how motherhood so gently and beautifully leads us in the way of spiritual formation. We're going to talk about how we need each other on the journey. We're going to talk about how our connection with God ultimately impacts the connection that we have with our kids. This retreat is both for mothers who desire to be mothers someday, all the way to grandmothers, and anywhere in between, because the truth is we all need each other. We need to learn from each other, and we need to be together. It was Dallas Willard who said, if you don't come apart for a while, you will come apart in a while. And that is especially true for us mothers. So we just invite you to come away with us. Let's see what the Spirit wants to do, and we can't wait to see you.
Yeah, so I love Jesus teaching in parables.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they're fascinating.
Yes.
And he tells a story, but there's a deeper meaning underneath the story. And so one is the parable of the talents in Matthew 25. And he says this: the kingdom of heaven is just like a man who's about to go on a journey, or a woman, and he calls his own servants and entrusted his possessions to them. And as you read this, it's just a story about a master and some servants, but as followers of Jesus, we know the master is Jesus and we're his servants. So you got to read it with both eyes. He gave, and here's the interesting part. To one, he gave 5 talents, to another 2, to another 1. And here's the key phrase: each according to his own ability. So he already knew this person's I've given this person great ability. And this has to do with spiritual gifts, just natural abilities, the way things God's given to us. And he went on his journey. So the master goes away. Immediately, the one who received the 5 talents went and traded with them and gained 5 more talents. In the same manner, the one who received the 2 talents gained 2 more. But he who received the 1 talent went away and dug in the ground and hid his master's money. The next verse says, now after a long time, the master of those slaves came and settled accounts with them. And I wrote in my Bible here, we live between verses 18 and 19. Jesus has gone away.
Yeah.
He is our master. He died on the cross. He rose from the dead. He appeared to more than 500 people over a period of 40 days. He ascended. He's seated at the right hand of the Father, and he's coming back. And we're living in the time between his first coming and his second coming. So when I read this, it's really cool. He gave us these talents, all of us, some 5, some 2, some 1. And after a long time, the master of those slaves came and settled accounts with them. So he's coming back, and he's going to say, what did you do with what I gave you? Okay, so, and the one who had received the 5 talents came up and brought 5 more talents and said, Master, you entrusted 5 talents to me. See, I gained 5 more talents. I served you. I did what you asked me to do. And he said, well done, good and faithful servant. And that's the words we all want to hear. You were faithful with a few things. I'll put you in charge of many things. Enter into the joy of your master. The one who received the 2 talents came up and said, Master, you gave me 2 talents. See, I've gained 2 more talents. His master said, well done, good and faithful servant. You were faithful with a few things. I'll put you in charge of many things. Enter into the joy of your master. No, this guy gets the same reward. The guy with 5, he had 10. This guy goes, well, I have 4. Same reward. So it's equal reward. It has to do with how you stewarded what you've been given, not how much you increased. And the one who received the 1 talent came and said, Master, I knew you were a hard man, reaping where you did not sow, gathering where you scattered no seed. I was afraid, so I went away and hid your talent in the ground. Here, you have what is yours. And then he gets rebuked, you wicked slave. Wait, why didn't you at least put it in the bank? Then I would have at least got it with interest. Everyone who has shall more be given. So it's a beautiful story, but the point is each according to his own ability. And I think when we compare, I'll speak for myself. I always look at the guy who's amazing. Even as a pastor, I look at these, man, he's my age. Look what he's doing. Like, I've done nothing. Man, and I admire these people and think like I should be doing more. And how come look what he did, And so I look at the 5 talent person, but the reality is there are 5 talent people. They just are gifted in incredible ways. But then sometimes our whole thinking is wrong. Like, what's important to God? Like, sometimes I think somebody who I'm going to step down from my job because I need to care for my wife who just got cancer, like our friend Steve Marshman, who's been laying down his life for Vicky instead of saying, well, I'll just put her in a care home because I want to go do ABC. He's doing something that is a 5 talent thing, but nobody, only believers who know that that's God's value system are going to value that. Other people would say, well, you're just wasting your life. You're young. You could be doing a bunch of stuff, and you're a pilot. You could be flying your plane and going on trips and just see your wife once in a while. No, he said, I'm going to care for her because that's my calling to lay down my life. So I think sometimes not only is it we want to be like the guy with 5 talents, I think sometimes we view incorrectly what is really important.
So can you define a talent then?
Yeah, well,
I think of a talent as like I'm good at something, somebody who sings or...
A talent was a sum of money. Okay, so but in the story, but to us it's our time, our money, and our talent and our gifts. I think so. I think that that's how we need to look at it. Not just, it has to do with our money. Like, what are we doing with our money? Is it our money? Actually, the Bible says, no, we're stewards of everything we have belongs to God.
Yes.
So we're stewarding it for him, but it's time, talent, and treasure. So I think it's like what am I doing with the time I've been given? What am I doing with the spiritual gifts and the natural abilities I've been given? You know, if you've been given a incredible musical gift or a writing gift like you have, you know, you're going to bury it in the sand like the guy said, I want to go to Hawaii every week and just, you know, I don't want to, that's too hard. Or you're going to say, I have to steward this gift. And then for mothers and fathers, your children are to be stewarded. They're some of God's greatest gifts to you. And that's where our value system gets, you know, it's the upside down kingdom,
skewed,
you know? Yeah. So I think we need what the world might say isn't important. Like, what else are you doing? That's actually the most important thing that you're doing, because that's your legacy, you know? So I think there's a lot here, but the story is the master's coming back and we're going to give an account. And I love that. That doesn't make me, it would make me scared if I was living for myself. But if I'm really trying to live for the Lord and realize that I have a purpose to please him and to be used by him and to give my life away to others, then you look forward to this time because you know you're going to live forever with him.
But what about the reality that so many people, because what you're talking about, that each of us have a certain amount of time, certain amount of talent, certain amount of treasure, because that's the case with all of us. We're all in different seasons, economic statuses, gift sets. What if you are a 5-talent person, but man, you assume you should be a 10-talent person, or you're constantly looking to the 10-talent person? So that's what we're talking about. And the reason I say that is because a bunch of studies have just come back that 80% of young Gen Z alpha generation want to be influencers. 80%. They want to be influencers, micro or macro. That's a problem, right?
Yeah.
So if we all want to be the influencer, you know, but no one wants to actually be the person following or just influence or accepting, the need for an influencer, that creates a weird culture. So, you know, let's talk about that for a minute. How do we actually live in that?
Let's talk about even the term influencer. That's a very narrow definition of it. I want lots of followers on Instagram, and I want to make money for promoting somebody else's product so that these followers who supposedly trust me or envy me or comparing themselves to me are buying it and I'm getting a percentage of it. But what about, you know, we had 4 children. What about the influence we have had because of raising Elizabeth and Matthew and Rebecca and Tamar? I mean, what about that influence? Or now the influence we're having over Birdie and Sloan and Scarlett and Duke and all of our grandkids. We forget, we just trade these superficial values for the real thing.
But the problem to highlight the problem and not to play devil's advocate to what you're saying, you're right. And that's biblical. But so many in our generation and even the ones below or coming up are going, I don't really value that though. So the problem becomes in that the value system or even seeing the value of what you're talking about is kind of like, well, I don't know if my greatest contribution is my kids. I think my greatest contribution is my pleasure and how my life plays out. Yeah. So the deeper problem, again, I'm not trying to go against this, the deeper problem of that.
We don't value the hidden things.
We don't value the hidden. Yeah. That's a great way to say it. We don't value the hidden.
The reality is someone living that way eventually will see that their foundation is going to crumble.
Yes.
You're right. You know, because they're not building their life on what God says is the way to live. And how do we know what that looks like? We look at Jesus. If Jesus said, if you've seen me, you've seen the Father. And so we look at how he lived his life and what he said in the Sermon on the Mount at the end, you know, he said, those who hear these words of mine and do them, put them into practice. That's the phrase. There will be like a house built on rock. And the storms will come and that house will stand. But those who hear these words of mine and don't put them into practice will be like a house built with no foundation and the storms came and washed them away. So you're right. I think it might look like a really cool house right now, but it's going to slide down the mountain. Are we living for the right purpose? Are we living, like we were talking earlier? I love when I read in my Bible, Moses, the servant of the Lord, David, the servant of the Lord, Paul, he said, he called himself the prisoner of the Lord. They lived for an audience of one, and God used them mightily. And they were not perfect men. None of them were, and they didn't have all the gifts. I mean, Paul was not a good speaker. Yeah. He said, you say my speech is contemptible. In other words, you're a terrible speaker compared to the orators of the day, which everybody would go to listen to a stage actor who could just orate and just mesmerize. And it's fascinating to hear people like that. Paul wasn't like that. And yet, he called himself the chief of sinners. And look how God used him. Most of the New Testament we read was written through him by the Lord. So I think sometimes we look at the wrong people. So I think that if some of the people we're looking at who their house looks great, in the end, it's going to crumble. Yeah. And so if we're comparing ourselves to these people, we're going to be unhappy in the end. So I heard this quote. I just read it this morning, kind of randomly, from a philosopher, Eric Hoffer. I have no idea who he is, but I love his quote. The search for happiness is one of the chief sources of unhappiness. And I would say there you go. The search to be like another is going to be one of the chief sources of being unhappy, because you're going to think, I don't measure up. You're going to get depressed. I need to do more. I need people to notice me like that. And I just need to, I want to be like them. And it's never going to work.
No. We have a new offering for you. If you would like to receive daily or weekly text messages and encouragement around parenting, marriage, with prayers and scriptures, click the link in the show notes and we would love to send those to you. Can't wait to connect more with you. Elizabeth, you had a verse though that I think connects with that. And we'll move on to the next one because we could spend our whole time just on the gifting one, the talents alone. Yeah. And you're right about the foundation, but hit us with that 1 Peter real quick. Yeah,
well, I think so often we don't know what our gifting actually is. And that because we live in just this very public world now where we get to see everybody in their gifting, we feel like there's only certain giftings, the really public ones, the ones that are really successful, the ones that are really obvious. So if we don't know what is ours to do, which is, sometimes it's a lifetime of unfolding. Who has God made you? Where have you invested time to develop gifts and education? And so this isn't like this, you should know by the time you're 18 what your giftings are. Like this evolves over time. But 1 Peter 4:10 says, each of you should use whatever gifts you have received, not like you've decided you should have. Received, like from God. God gives the gifts, to serve others as faithful stewards of God's grace in its various forms. And like when you think about it, that's the redemptive side of what we're talking about. And it implies that we are all to know what gifts we've received from God. And then it's our job to steward them. Like thinking of the talents, God gave each of them different talents, but he asked them to do the same thing with all of them.
Go invest them.
Yes, go multiply it. Go put your time and energy into it. And so I think it's this, if there's maybe one takeaway from today, it's asking God and the people who know you best, like, where are my natural giftings and how do I lean into them more and steward them more? Yes. And this applies to every area of our lives, from what you do vocationally to how you run your home, to how you parent your kids. Like, yes, we can all grow, we can all evolve, and we need to. But what if we all, rather than comparing each other, knew who we were, knew what God had gifted us uniquely to do, and then leaned hard into that? Then we're going to lean into the uniqueness, the God's grace in various forms, which was his purpose in that. And that idea of the body of Christ, that we all play different parts to make up one body. We can't all be an eye. We can't all be a hand, you know?
But I even think, to add on to what you're saying, it's really important to maybe highlight, because the question comes in my mind, which I know comes to many listening, is, well, how do I find that? Because there's a lot of folks that are even in mid adulthood, 30s, even 40s, going, I still am trying to figure it out. And and I would say, first of all, let's normalize that. That's okay. That's totally part of the process. I even think, just to bring it really personally for me, I, for a long time, since I was a pastor for 18 years, thinking, oh, I should probably lead a church because that's all the things that you do. And I remember, Phil, every time we talked about it, it wasn't that you shot it down, but you were always like, I don't know. And I always, for at least a while, was like, he doesn't believe in me. He doesn't think I can do it. He probably just thinks I'm weak at this stuff. But you saw something knowing me that I didn't see in myself. And you started calling out things that were like, no, I think you could do it. I just don't think you would be happy doing it. And it was because I didn't see something going on in me that you saw. And so I think it's important to highlight that there's a lot of that kind of process, long form, deep relationship with other people where you need other people to help you see where your gifts are and see where they really are. Not, and of course you'll have an idea, but sometimes, like Elizabeth, you said really wisely, we just choose or want the gifts that we're drawn to or that maybe we like. And we have a hard time accepting maybe some of the stuff that we are actually supposed to do. And instead of rejoicing in it, learning it more, we just kind of push against it. I'm saying I did that. I remember that. And I remember you, Phil, you're like, I think you're going to be way better at leading a nonprofit than leading a church.
You already are.
Like, I was like, I don't know. I can't see how that works. And it was just kind of offensive because my world was like, well, this is what I wanted to do, or this is what it actually wasn't what I wanted to do as much as it was the model that I understood. Sure. It was like, that makes sense. This is all fuzzy.
And this
I don't
is what
know
everybody else is doing.
Yeah, I don't know what to do with the fuzzy part. How do you figure out that?
Well,
so anyway.
And to add on top of that is that certain giftings are so heavily praised.
Yes.
And then side tangent here, we can save it for another time. But the idea of like blessing and encouraging other people and calling out what we see in them. I think often as a culture, we're good at doing that for the huge, obvious gifts or the influencers or the celebrity pastor or whatever. But I'm thinking of like the Vicky Hughes, this woman we know who has spent her entire adult life caring for a daughter with Down syndrome and significant health struggles. Most people will never know who she is.
No.
But the people who actually know her and have been in any bit of close relationship with her, she is a woman with a depth of character that is you can't even describe.
No, she's like somebody I would call great in the kingdom.
And
like
most people will never know who she is.
No.
And I just think of like, man, what if we had a language of encouragement, a language of blessing, and we were highlighting all of the different gifts. Like I remember when I was an admin at a church. Admins are some of the most underappreciated people. And yet they are like propping up everything that happens throughout the week on a Sunday. And it's a very thankless job. Same thing with being a mom. Like you're literally raising the next generation. People who are going to influence the world, who are going to take care of you as you're dying. And it's a thankless job until your kids get older and then they start to thank you and it's beautiful. But man, what if we started helping people understand what they were good at and calling out all the things we saw in them? That would really shift things, I think.
But you guys are doing that with your kids right now. Remember when we teach in our parenting, material, on the teenage years, 4 things you'll need, 3 things your teenagers need. One of them is to discover what they're good at. So that's the parent's job. I think you can discover your calling, your gifts, and your abilities sooner if the parents are not living for themselves, but actually laying down their lives for their kids. Jesus said, if you want to be great in God's kingdom, learn to be the servant of all. So if you're a parent, you're a servant. You're laying down your life for your kids. But now what a gift you give them if you help them at as young age as possible. And they're going to try different things out and you're going to guide them and you're not going to, humiliate them. Well, I told you wouldn't be any good at that. They're going to discover some things on their own. But I've learned you actually, as part of the family of God and the church, we're supposed to be part of the church. You just start being there and serving and all people start to tell you what your gift is. So it's a discovery within community that happens, and it happens within the family. So you guys are doing this with Scarlett and Duke and Verdi. You already see their different gifts and you've called them out and you're blessing them and you're looking ways to develop them. And I think Elizabeth is right. We should be doing that for one another and we should not be giving praise for the wrong things. And that's what our culture is really good at. Is saying this is amazing, but does God think it's amazing? No.
Well, and I think,
or even just such a narrow sphere of things. Like, some of the things really are amazing and a high impact. But
they're not the only thing.
So is a Vicky Hughes who's just steadfastly serving Jesus primarily for one person.
Yeah.
While we get to be this audience that are watching something that is so rarely seen in human history and culture that it's impacting everybody who knows her at all.
And she's ending up impacting more people than she even knows. Because when we were in the hospital with Birdie, she wrote me a letter. I cry every time I talk about it or read it. I still have it. I still read it often. Basically telling me the treasures of what was going to happen as suffering unfolded, you know? And I can't tell you how many times I've sent copies of that letter, the exact same letter, to other people whose kids have been recently diagnosed with similar things to Birdie. Like her being willing to bring that to the hospital for me, to give me a little bit of hope, has helped countless people. And it's impactful for all of them that they keep it and read it often. It's beautiful.
And her reward is coming. It's going to be in heaven. You know, like in the Sermon on the Mount, you know, the Pharisees were like, when they were giving, they were letting everybody see what they were dropping in the basket. And Jesus says they have their reward in full because they were doing it so people would think they were amazing. But he said the same thing about prayer, standing and praying long, loud prayers. He said, go into your closet and pray, and your Father who sees in secret will repay you. So I think that's Vicky. Vicky is laying down her life for Rachel and Dave too. And those are the people that I want to be in the crowd when the reward is handed out because it's all about eternity. This life is just preparation for eternity. We get to serve him now. And there is a connection to how we live our life now and what we're going to experience, the responsibilities we're going to have one day with the Lord. And it doesn't have to be ministry like I'm preaching or teaching. You know, it could be a doctor. I've got this education and I'm laying down my life and helping all these people. And that's my calling and I know it. And God's going to say, well done, good and faithful servant. I didn't call you to be an accountant. But we need accountants too, you know, to keep organizations from
what I find really sweet is that I find really sweet that we have a doctor in the room.
I know, that's what made me think of it.
Right. Okay.
She's off camera, but she's helping us all. She's helping our whole family. And hundreds of other people.
We love you, Janelle.
So here's a thought I want to just throw out. I could be far off on this one. So, but it's kind of fun to throw something out unexpected. What if the greatest hurts, trials in our lives, disappointments, what if they're part of the treasure? You know, God calls them
100%.
treasures in the darkness. What if that's part, what if we're given, like in the case of Vicky Hughes, given a Rachel, a medically fragile child, what if we're given that, and that's actually something we are called to steward?
And it evolves and grows our gifts. This is funny that you're bringing this up because I was thinking about this. We were recording yesterday on a totally different topic. And you brought up how it's so interesting that we have kids when we're so young, when we're not fully developed or mature, and we wound our kids.
Right.
Why did God do it that way? And I was thinking, but we'd already gone too long, so I didn't say it on the episode. I was thinking, man, I'm curious if the wounding and having to work through it and having to work towards healing, even some things like trauma and things like that, is that a part of God's method for our formation?
Yes, of course.
That is what keeps us connected to him. That is what keeps us needing to heal and grow. Because you think about if that wasn't the case, why would we would not have as big especially in Western culture, we would not have as big of a felt need for God in our relationships, in our everyday life. So I think it's so interesting that you brought that up because I've been pondering that a lot. I think it's 100% true of suffering. And I would also say back to it takes a long time sometimes to discover what your giftings are. I'm almost 39. And I don't think I could have told you with confidence. I could have told you with I think maybe, but I don't want to come across boastful. Maybe that's not my gifting. I could have told you, I think maybe these are some of the things. And I don't think I could say with confidence until maybe the last year or two of like, no, I think I know how God has gifted me and how he's made me and what he's called me to do. And I'm getting real clear on what is not mine to do. But it's taken that long. And I think to what you were saying, Brooke, like sometimes it just takes a long time, even if you were given clues as a kid, which you guys did a great job. I feel like my family's been telling me for years the areas that I'm gifted, but it's taken me this long to like, okay, I think they're right.
Or to accept that.
And because we could go on and on and on in this group, who I love very much, are
we could talk forever.
Kings and queens of rabbit holes. We all are. Just to keep us on track, there's a couple things maybe to kind of wrap up what you're saying and kind of guide us through the rest of our time as we close. Phil, you were talking about the importance of parents helping their kids figure out their gifting and their calling. That's immensely important because I knew I grew up in a family. I got into adulthood and it was like, that was one of the reasons why it's taken me so long to figure out, well, what is mine really to do? And part of that was because I had no help really along the way. Now, my parents didn't know that that would be something maybe beneficial or helpful to do, but nonetheless, like it has caused myself and many men I know, especially men, to go, well, what is mine to do? Obviously, I need to work for money, but man, what a gift you can give your kids to give them direction. But when they start, what a gift that, and then also just to think through, we talked about gifting. The other one that we talked about was, our calling. I think gifting and calling are similar. So the two I just want to hone on and hone on really quick, and we will be brief. And that's basically a request and a command for all of us, please, is our appearance. Let's just talk about our appearances really quick, because I think that's a huge one. And our stage, meaning our stage of life. So let's just talk about those two really quick, and then we'll close. But basically, how in culture our comparison of appearance can be just so damaging, and then our stage. So our appearance. One thing I'm learning as I get older is it's very comical to compare appearances because everyone has a whole different genetic recipe. So it is so interesting to me when our culture goes, this is the thing, this is the sign of beauty. And you're like, my body's never going to do that no matter what, no matter what you try, no matter what you do, it's never doing that. So I just feel like it's a very simple thing in one sense to go like, there's a couple of truths to maybe say that God's designed us all differently and beautifully. But man, what a place that we get trapped in our appearance. And any thoughts on that before we go to our stage?
I think that's a whole episode.
If you're enjoying this content and you want to go deeper, we have an amazing resource that we want to tell you about. It's the Intentional film series, Raising Passionate Jesus Followers. Now, this is an incredible tool for you for spiritual formation in the family. And we created this film series to help parents in their God-given task to raise and disciple their own children. Now, our hope is that we're able to help you and give you some of the tools that I know we so desperately need as we're in the process of raising our kids, and Phil and Diane have actually raised their kids. This is a 9-session film series on the process of what raising a passionate Jesus follower actually looks like. There's some workable solutions in here. There's a bunch of wisdom from the scriptures, and there's a bunch of practical help in your journey as you are raising your children. We cover all sorts of things like parental roles, goals versus values. What is discipline versus punishment? How do I create a heart of obedience in my child where they actually want to obey? What does a heart of self-control look like? Or how do I even help my child in the process of character development? We cover that and so many more things. You can use this film series in a variety of ways. You can use it at your home, preferably with your spouse if that's applicable, with a group of friends or in your community, or even through your local church. All you need to do is head over to our website, intentionalparents.org, click on film series, and then follow the prompts. We have a bunch of other resources there that you can check out, but we do pray that this blesses you in your pursuit of raising passionate Jesus followers.
I think it's huge in most stages of life, and some people get trapped in different stages, more entrenched. Do you feel like it gets easier as you get older? Or harder?
I feel like it's gotten easier as I've gotten older because there's this delightful tag that starts getting added to the conversation of especially by the time you reach 50, I felt like even the 40s was helpful this way. You look so good for your age. and it's like takes a pressure off in the strangest way. Now I don't have to compare myself to the world's most beautiful. I'm actually comparing myself to I don't know, something more negative, and you come out feeling better about yourself. So I actually do think it is. And then also I'm finding there are a lot of women as they get older who just get more and more comfortable in their own skin.
Yeah.
And they're refusing to do the whole, having their face fixed and starvation diets. And they're really coming to a place where you say, this is who I am. And I love out of this body. I smile out of this face, and I'm loving well. And therefore I am becoming the most beautiful version of myself. Mm-hmm. I feel like in my sphere of friends, I'm seeing more and more of that. Mm. You hear way less apology for not looking perfect, or way less. I rarely hear a woman my age put herself down. Mm. And when you do, something's really wrong. Mm. That something's just off in the way she sees herself. So I do think it gets better.
Yeah. Mm. I feel that. I mean, I feel like we're not there yet, but I do feel like as I'm getting older, it does feel like it's getting easier. Mm-hmm. Like less, I've heard a lot of women say this, that like 30s are great, but 40s are the best decade for women because...
Oh, no, 50 was my best.
Yeah, that's great. I look
50.
forward to it.
I thought 50 was
great.
But
it's that basically your 30s, you start to care a whole lot less and discover who you are.
Yeah.
And by your 40s, you just really don't care.
Yeah.
And I feel that. I feel like the last couple of years, there's been more of a shift, more and more of a, where it's like this transition to a different stage. Yeah. Even I remember like a couple of years ago realizing like shopping and trying to be like, well, I'm not 20.
Yeah.
So what type of clothes am I looking for? Like, I don't want to look like I'm trying too hard, but I don't want to dress my age either.
Yeah. Yeah.
But where there's this like acceptance of like something is shifting, something is changing.
Yeah.
And it's really freeing. It really, is freeing. Really freeing.
Because I love fashion and cute clothes and all that. But it does feel like it's what age opens up this whole wide, you can wear the older clothing that is more sophisticated, and then you can also just dress casual. So in our culture, it's less defined now. I feel like, honestly, there's a lot of freedom in this whole appearance comparison. I mean, you're still comparing yourself to the facelifted, Botox, lasered people on television or something. But your average woman my age at the grocery store isn't actually doing all of that. Maybe what I do hear is a few women saying, I look in the mirror and it looks like I'm frowning, so I'm going to do something about it. Mm-hmm. More often, it's like, I earned this face. I've been through some hard things and I'm still smiling, and I'm going to let my smile settle on my face.
Well, there's a certain level too. This isn't to moralize it, but there's spiritual disciplines, I think, even built into there. Like vanity is not helpful to our soul. Vanity, self-obsession, vanity with how we look, how all our appearance, it leads to depression. It leads to absolute, really a lot of deep, hard feelings. And so
I also think there's vanity. I'm getting older.
Yeah.
And I've earned the right to look like it.
Yes.
Well, so the New Testament says the outer man is decaying, but the inner man is being renewed day by day. None of our these bodies are not designed for eternity. So I don't care if you're 80 years old. I don't care what you do to your body. You're not going to look like you're 26. No. And you're going to get a new body when you go to be with the Lord. And I think we need to, I couldn't help but think of, this is nothing new. Like, remember when Samuel was sent to anoint David, the next king? Well, he didn't know which brother it was. So they started with the oldest, and Eliab says, surely it's him. Nope. God sees not as man sees. Man looks on the outward appearance, the Lord looks on the heart. Yes. All the brothers come before and they go, there's none of them. You got anybody else? Well, just David. He's just out with the sheep.
God doesn't care how you look in a swimsuit.
No, I mean, God didn't pick David because he was the handsomest and the tallest and the best looking.
Yes.
He saw his heart. Yeah. So I think that when we're talking about comparing to appearance, I think we have to remember that.
And I love that. I agree, it could be a whole episode, but let's just talk about this. There's a quote that that you put in here from Christine Kane. Do you want me to read it real quick?
Yeah,
Yeah.
you've got a copy of it.
Yeah,
Read it.
let me read it real quick. Then we'll talk about our stage and we'll be done. Christine Kane said this. She's just a powerhouse,
She's
but she
amazing.
just said some stuff that I thought was, it's amazing. She said, so many of us are so busy trying to be amazing that we're not amazing God. And we're so busy curating a public profile that has no power. And we're spending no time cultivating a private life with Jesus that would build our interior world so that we would have power that comes from the Holy Ghost inside of us. If we stopped trying to amaze each other and we started to try to amaze God, then God could do amazing things in and through our lives. Here's the great news of the gospel. You don't have to be awesome because God is awesome.
That's so
That
good.
is just
So
like
good.
sums it up.
So good.
Sums it up. We don't have to be awesome because God is. So in closing, let's just talk about where I think a lot of different folks get trapped in. It's their stage. So we get trapped in comparing our stage. I think that's a really important one because the truth is there's just places you can't be yet.
Yeah.
And it's really easy to look to a couple or a people or a family style or a marriage 10 years down the road. And the only way you can get there is by going through it. You can't go around it. You got to go through it.
So I was actually just listening to an old teaching from Christine Kane, like almost 10 years ago, just randomly came across it. And she was talking about this very thing about we're always trying to like, well, if I could just get there, I could just get where that person is or just, and she's like, where is there? There is here right now. And she said, do you know how long it takes? She was about to celebrate 20 years of marriage. But do you know how long it's taken to celebrate 20 years of marriage? 20 years. You know how long she's been in ministry for like 25 years. She said, do you know how long it's taken to have 25 years of ministry experience? 25 years.
Yeah.
And then it's just
really
this
good
idea
point.
of there is no hack for spiritual formation.
No.
Yeah.
There is
There's
no
no
hack
shortcut.
for
Mhm.
developing your family and developing character. Yes, we can put ourselves in places that maybe speed up some of those processes, but you can't be 10 years further than you actually are. So I think we have to be so aware of who and what we're comparing ourselves to. I know this was a big trap. I think this is a trap when you're younger,
You're pointing at
especially.
me.
This
What
was
does
a
this
trap
mean?
for us in our 20s of looking to people who were just even 5 years ahead of us
Yeah.
and feeling like, unbeknownst to us, there was all this entitlement we had of like, well, we don't make as much money as them and we're doing the same thing, you know, not taking into account the experience they had that we didn't have, the 5 years
Education.
even.
Yeah.
And I think there's less of that as we've gotten older. But I think we do
Sure.
that in work context. We do that in like family, raising kids context.
Mhm.
Especially, I think when you see families who have multiple ages, you feel like if they have young kids and old kids, you kind of only notice that they have young kids and compare yourself to all the things they're doing, or that they've been at it a lot longer than you. Or anyway, I think that's
We'll keep talking about this topic, but but I think the thing that's important, Ecclesiastes 12:13, in the Message translation, it just has 6 words. It says in some, after all this stuff, the final words this: fear God, do what he tells you. I think there's so much wisdom in that. No matter where you're at and comparing your life with other people's lives, stages, all that stuff, there's really 2 things to do: is fear God and do what he tells you. That's the similar idea: love God and love people, right? I love how Jesus makes it really simple. The Bible makes it really simple. We're to love God a lot and we're to obey. We're to love God a lot and love other people. That's really what this is about. And the coolest part is if you're a person that is consumed by comparison and you're miserable within yourself, just God created you with a lot of good to give other people. And it's your job to slow down enough, even remove those distractions. If there's things that just constantly, like Diane, you pointed out very wisely, these things are coming at you now. You might have to just stop the window or the door from coming at you. You might have to close that door and lock it and keep it locked so that you can stay in a place of emotional, mental, spiritual sanity. That's a very real thing that we have to do. It's maybe not something you had to do before, but maybe you have to do it now. And that's okay. You're not weak because you have to do it. You're wise to do it. So fear God and do what he tells you. Again, we could compare all day. We could compare our podcast length with other people's podcast length, but I'm not going to do that.
Ours will be longer.
Yes. No, there's some. I recently listened to a podcast. I could not believe it. It was a 6-hour conversation. I was like, I did not know that you could upload a 6-hour conversation.
No.
So we haven't done that yet.
Goals,
they've
guys.
done a good way of renaming those. They call it long form interviews.
Oh yeah.
Oh, then you can talk as long
Then
as
it
you
sounds
want.
so sophisticated.
Well, we technically, I mean, if you didn't know this,
We're
we
long
technically
form.
are long
We
form
are long
podcasts.
form.
Yeah, we can't ever really get within the hour. We try, but I mean, it's
I know.
still hour
and
20.
here I'm thinking about all these more things to
I
be
know.
said.
I know.
I
So
know.
part of that's just synergy. We kind of feed off of each other.
We all do.
Yeah.
It happens all the
So,
time.
we
So
need to come back and keep revisiting this.
let's compare ourselves and say we should do better at this. Let's let's keep comparing. No, but sincerely, wherever you're at, may God bless you. Fear God, do what He tells you, and thank you for listening.